Today, we are diving deep into a really fascinating legal puzzle at the very heart of India's personal laws. It's a story about marriage, it's about identity, and it's about a law that's, believe it or not, way broader than its name might suggest. So let's just jump right in with a question that gets to the core of this whole thing. If a couple from what's known as a scheduled tribe gets married using Hindu rituals, what law applies when they want a divorce? Do they have to follow their tribe's own customs, or does the National Hindu Marriage Act take over? Well, the answer is not so simple.
And to really understand this, let's look at a real-life case. We're talking about the Meena couple. Both the husband and the wife are members of the Meena community, which is an officially recognized scheduled tribe. Now their marriage unfortunately broke down, and that's when they found themselves in a complete legal maze.
Okay, so here was the basic conflict. The husband went to court seeking a divorce under the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955. But the wife's argument was basically, hold on, the court should throw this case out. Why? Because, she argued, as members of a scheduled tribe, the Hindu Marriage Act simply does not apply to them. Period.
And at first, the family court actually agreed with the wife. They dismissed the husband's petition. So, case closed, right? Well, not so fast. That was definitely not the end of the story. And to really get why, we need to zoom out a bit and take a look at the law itself.
So, the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955. This is the main law for marriage for a huge number of people in India. But you should think of it less like a rule book for just one religion and more like a giant legal umbrella. It covers a surprisingly diverse group of people, and it defines this whole category of who falls under what's called Hindu personal law. And just look at how wide this umbrella is. I mean, it doesn't just cover people who identify as Hindu. The Act explicitly says it also covers anyone who is a Buddhist, a Jain, or a Sikh. So, for the legal purposes of marriage and divorce, all these distinct religions are governed by this one single act.
Now, before we get back to our main story with the Meena couple, it really helps to see how this law is supposed to work when things are clear. So take this case from Madhya Pradesh. A Jain couple wanted a divorce. Simple enough. But the local court said no, claiming that since Jains are officially a minority community, the Hindu Marriage Act couldn't possibly apply to them.
Well, the High Court came back, and let's just say they strongly disagreed. They called the lower court's decision a grave illegality. Their reasoning was absolutely crystal clear. The law as it's written specifically and explicitly says it applies to Jains. End of story. This just goes to show you that umbrella is meant to be really broad.
So the law seems pretty straightforward about its wide reach. But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? This is the crucial twist that brings us right back to the Meena case. There is one very, very significant exception built right into the law. And here it is. This is the exact wording that the wife was banking on. Section 2, subsection 2 of the Act. It basically carves out a huge exemption, saying the law does not apply to members of any scheduled tribe unless the government specifically says otherwise.
So you have to ask, why is that exception even there? Well, it was a very deliberate choice. The whole idea was to protect and respect the unique customs and traditions of India's many tribal communities. A lot of these communities have their own unwritten laws for things like marriage and divorce that have been around for generations. And boom, this brings us right back to the center of our puzzle. You have an excluded group, the Meenas, who are a scheduled tribe. But what happens when that group voluntarily decides to follow the marriage customs of an included group, in this case, Hindus? This is the exact legal gray area the court had to figure out.
So let's look at the actual facts of their wedding. It wasn't done according to some ancient tribal custom. Nope, it followed what's called Hindu Riti Riwaj, Hindu rites and customs. It even included the Saptapadi, the 7 sacred steps around a fire, which is a key part of a Hindu wedding. And here's the kicker. The wife, the one arguing the act didn't apply, she admitted all of this was true.
So how on earth did the court solve this? Well, they used a legal principle called the Hinduized doctrine. It's this concept that the Supreme Court of India came up with, and it basically says that if members of a tribe have become Hinduized, meaning they've willingly adopted Hindu traditions and customs, then yeah, Hindu personal law can apply to them, even with that exemption in the Act. And this was the court's final, decisive logic. They said that forcing the Meena couple into a customary tribal system, especially when they themselves chose to follow Hindu wedding traditions, would be antithetical. In other words, it would completely go against the whole point of having a modern, written-down law like the Hindu Marriage Act in the first place.
Okay, so let's zoom out one last time, because the conflict in this one case, it's not some isolated incident, not at all.
In fact, it shines a huge spotlight on a much larger and often really contentious national debate that's been happening in India for a long, long time.
You see, for decades now, India's courts have been pointing to these exact kinds of messy conflicts as proof that the country needs a uniform civil code, a UCC. That's a single set of personal laws for every citizen, no matter their religion or community. This call started way back in 1985 with the famous Shah Bano case. It was repeated that same year, it was echoed again in 2015, and guess what? The court brought it up again in this very Meena case in 2021.
Just think about that for a second. More than 30 years. 30 years have gone by since the Supreme Court first said, hey, government, you should probably move towards a uniform civil code. It's a debate that has literally spanned generations, and it's fueled by these complex, human stories just like the one we've been talking about.
And that brings us right to our final thought for today. And it's a really powerful quote from the Delhi High Court's ruling on the Meena case. They said that the constitutional hope for a uniform civil code ought not to remain a mere hope. And that really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Is a single law for everyone the answer? Or does the real solution lie in what we saw here today? A very careful and constant balancing act between custom and code.